Hello, welcome to Miles to Go. I'm Miles O'Brien. This week, we're going nuclear. Literally. With plans for a sustained human presence on the moon and eventually Mars, NASA is facing a stark truth. Solar power just won't cut it. Lunar nights last 14 Earth days. Dust choked solar panels, and shadowed craters hover near absolute zero. So, if we're serious about staying, not just visiting, flags and footprints, we need something more robust and reliable. And that means nuclear reactors in space. But this is no small step. The U.S. hasn't launched a nuclear reactor since 1965. But in August, acting NASA Administrator Sean Duffy directed the agency to accelerate its fission surface power project. The goal is to launch a 100-kilowatt nuclear fission power plant to the moon by 2030. The push to fast-track the program comes amid geopolitical concerns about competition with China and Russia, which are also pursuing nuclear power for their lunar exploration plans. The initiative calls for the plant to generate enough electricity to support a small lunar outpost through the long lunar nights. Ambitious? Absolutely. Achievable? Well, that's what we're here to discuss. Joining me are two voices who know this terrain better than anyone. Bhavya Lal is a former Associate Administrator for Technology, Policy, and Strategy at NASA. She's now at the RAND Corporation, where she co-authored a major report for the Idaho National Laboratory outlining a roadmap to get reactors off the drawing board and onto the lunar surface. Keith Cowing, longtime space journalist and editor of NASA Watch, and an old friend of mine, has spent decades chronicling NASA's triumphs, flameouts, and everything in between. He's also logged time in the Arctic on Mars simulation missions, so he knows firsthand what it takes to survive off the grid, in the dark, and in the cold. Together, we unpack the engineering, the politics, the risks, and yes, the radiation of going nuclear in space. Let's dive in. Bhavya and Keith, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
I'm excited to be here, especially with Keith, two Star Trek fans. This is big. I don't know, Miles, if you are, but I'm hoping by the end of this, if you're not, you will be.
Well, of course, there is a Miles O'Brien character in Star Trek, later generations. You guys are probably purists, but
No.
I frequently hear from people who say, hey, do you know that the transporter dude is Chief Miles O'Brien? Can you believe that?
Yeah.
And I always tell them, well, actually, he's my great-great-great-great-grandson. I think I did the math once on that, and that comes out about right.
Oh, my wife is an O'Brien. She's upstairs. They're everywhere in the cosmos.
The sons and daughters of Brian Baru are quite the tribe.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so let's talk about nuclear in space, Bhavya, and you have particular expertise in this in your great and storied career. And, I think it's worth reminding people why this is important. I think people are vaguely familiar with the fact that a lot of spacecraft do their missions relying on solar power. But there are certain applications, if you start thinking about building encampments on the South Pole of the Moon or Mars, where solar is just not going to do the job, correct? Just give us kind of a first principles on why nuclear for a space encampment is such a good idea.
Okay, so let's start with just nuclear alone first. So what nuclear does, it gives you power density. Pinky-sized uranium fuel pellet has the same energy as about 120 gallons of oil. So more energy per unit mass is the name of the game, right? Now in space, mass is money. Every kilogram to orbit is expensive, so missions have historically rationed power. Now let's talk about the moon. Night on the moon lasts about 14 Earth days. Solar panels do nothing in darkness, and even dust is a real risk, and that's the risk even when the sun is up. batteries, which is something we've used, sized to bridge 2 weeks of night at meaningful power levels, will reach shipping container-sized volumes and many tons of mass. Nuclear fission doesn't care about sunlight or dust. It provides steady, high-quality power day and night. Bottom line, nuclear helps you create this paradigm shift where you actually go from essentially having candlelight to grid electricity level power.
Now, over the years, you mentioned briefly the what are called RTG power plants, which fuel spacecraft, including one of the rovers on Mars right now, RTG, which actually has a piece of plutonium in it that gets hot, and that heat gets converted into electricity to drive the spacecraft. How many launches, give or take, has the U.S. done which have those RTG plutonium devices on them?
Wow, probably more than a dozen or so, and maybe Keith has a better count of that. So the Voyager missions, they had RTGs on them. All of the Apollo missions, 12 to 17 had RTGs on them. You mentioned the Perseverance rover. In fact, it isn't just electric power generation that RTGs do. They also actually produce heat. We have these things called RUs, radioisotope heating units, which basically are used to produce heat on our spacecraft. So then the electronics doesn't go cold and freeze and go bad.
In 1965, things were very different. We're looking at some pictures of the SNAP 10A mission, which is the only U.S.-built nuclear reactor that was ever launched into space. Bhavya, give us a few words about this mission and what it accomplished. And perhaps it's worth talking about why that was the one and only.
Right. So SNAP 10A, as you said, was launched in 1965. It produced about, I think, 500 watts of power. So, not that much power. It was quite small. I mean, that's what, a toaster-ish, maybe less than a toaster amount of power. But what was interesting was it actually included experimental thrusters. So it wasn't just power. It was also an experiment or a test for nuclear electric propulsion, which not a lot of people know. It was a test. It was a highly successful test. It operated for about 43 days before it was shut down for reasons unrelated to nuclear power. There was a voltage regulator issue, so they decided to shut it down. It was put into a nuclear safe orbit, as in, it wasn't going to hit other things. But yeah, it was a highly successful experiment, and it is really too bad that we haven't returned to space since 1965.
So what happened? We got a little bit scared about nukes, I guess. Is that what it is, or is there a more nuanced answer?
So as you know, we wrote a report on this, and we came up with 4 reasons for why we haven't returned. The first one is lack of a mission pull. Nobody's actually asked, until recently, nobody's actually asked for nuclear power or propulsion in space, whether it's the Department of Defense or NASA or any other agency, or even the private sector up until now. So that's the first thing. And without mission pull, there's no tech development. Nobody wants to develop technology, or at least they get tired of developing technology, because when things go south, there's nothing that keeps you going. So we enter this vicious cycle, this chicken and egg, where without mission pull, there's no tech development. Without tech development, nobody wants to have the thing. So that's the first one. The second one is overreach. And we have done this before in the early 2000s. There was actually a mission called GMO Prometheus, which was going to go to the moons of Jupiter and explore, do science. It was a nuclear electric propulsion mission for about 200 kilowatts of power. It was too much. We were basically trying to develop an SR-71 before we had the right flyer. And after spending about $400 million, it got shut down. So that's the second reason. We somehow don't like to start small and then move up slowly. We like to do the big thing, right? So anytime we start a program, we stop it, people fly off to the winds, and it's just fragmented. And there is no government agency, unlike the nuclear navy, which is responsible for making sure we keep making progress. Department of Defense doesn't, Department of Energy doesn't, NASA doesn't. And so we just, at the end, so we start and we stop and we start and we stop. And, people have looked at it, and over the last 60 years, we have spent maybe 20 billion or more a dozen programs with nothing to show for it.
That's kind of sobering. We sort of need, like, a Hyman Rickover, the legendary father of the nuclear navy, who, while he was going, he would interview anyone who got on one of his submarines, literally, and grill them. It was kind of, completely kind of a top-down operation, or Leslie Groves with the Manhattan Projects. We don't have that kind of structure, do we?
Miles, of course, the curious thing is Prometheus was put forth by Sean O'Keefe, former Secretary of the Navy, who grew up in New London, where his father worked for Rickover. So it's not a coincidence. He was familiar with the technology and maybe could put aside a lot of the fears. But again, just as it was getting going, we ran into a change in administrations and priorities, and clunk, it stopped.
And we absolutely say that in our report, Miles and Kate, that the nuclear enterprise, the space nuclear enterprise, needs an Admiral Rickover to make sure we stay on track, we meet our deadlines, we stay on budget, because we seem to have a problem with that.
Yeah, I think they broke the mold, though, on him, for sure, All right, so let's a couple words, though, about nuclear propulsion. Just, again, kind of a first principles here for folks who may not fully appreciate what that's all about. Much of the conversation for years has been focused on propulsion as opposed to putting reactors on the surface of another body. But nuclear propulsion does offer the possibility of drastically speeding up these missions to a Mars mission right now. The benchmark minimum round trip is about 500 days all in, and that's just for a short time on the surface. So, Bhavya, nuclear propulsion, is that why was that the priority for a while? Why is it not now? And would you suggest this is something that can come later or should be sooner?
So this is such a great question, Miles. Why has nuclear propulsion always been such a priority? And I claim that it is how we started thinking about space, the romance, going to, faraway planets. And at the time we didn't have, and again, I'm talking, turn of the 20th century, there was no robotics automation that we really could put our fingers on. So propulsion was what people thought about. And, it was about going to the moon, going to Mars. So we absolutely need propulsion. Unfortunately, propulsion is just hard. So I'll give you an example comparing power and propulsion. A power reactor in space it operates at about 1,000 Celsius. A propulsion reactor needs to operate at 3,000 Kelvin. These are seriously high temperatures. We do not have materials that can operate at those sorts of temperatures. The second challenge with propulsion is that we need to store, and if hydrogen is the propellant, we need to store cold hydrogen in space, and the hydrogen molecule is so small that it escapes through every pressure vessel we might have. So that's just a big technical challenge we need to solve. And the third and the most important reason is that we have no opportunity to ground test a propulsion system. We need testing facilities, which may cost billions of dollars. So again, propulsion is a huge priority. It is just really hard. Power is relatively easier. It has near-term use. So just last year, NASA put a stake in the ground and said, we need power. A requirement was actually set. So power is a mission pull. And as I said at the start, when things have a mission pull, the things stick. So, power is the thing that there is a requirement for. Third thing I mentioned, it is easier. And the fourth thing I haven't had a chance to mention is there's actually an emerging market for power, high-density power in space. There's companies that want to do things in, with high-density power in Earth orbit, for example, have data centers or compute centers. There's companies that want to do mining, ISRU on the moon, and bring back things like helium-3 back from the moon, and other mining things companies would like to do. So those are the reasons that prioritize power over propulsion in the near term. I think of it as a sequencing problem. So we start with power. Remember I was saying we start small and go up. So propulsion is hard, power is easier. Let's start with power. As we grow up the learning curve, the capability curve, we get to propulsion.
So given that, Keith, the decision by the Trump administration to zero out propulsion efforts and lean more into nuclear power on the surface of the moon and Mars eventually, is that a wise decision, you think?
Yeah, you know what? Just two things. Yes, first of all, nuclear, whether you're, where you fit on the political spectrum, if you have any engineering sense, you'd say, well, of course you want nuclear. But we just throw little bits of money at it to feel good. At some point, you got to really just sit back and say, one foot in front of the other. Right now, they haven't decided how they want to go to Mars because there's a lot of money involved. They do want to go back to the moon. Full stop. That's something that's going to happen within the next 3 years. How do we efficiently take the energy that we need there? Maybe solar panels someday will be an adjunct, but you got to go and build them. And the guys who build them have to have a place to live. And you have to have power there before you have the solar panels. So again, you always come back to nuclear as the answer. And that usually stops us dead. So finally, they're going to go and try and put a sizable nuclear power system on the moon that they can probably just land there. It throws a few antennas up and turns itself on. And you just show up and you plug into it like you do your little power bank when you're getting off the airplane.
So I think what you're saying there is there's kind of a mission pull right now,
yes,
Bhavya, which has been missing to this point. When you think about what the short-term mission is and the requirement, you don't need nuclear propulsion to get to the moon. That's a 4-day run, right? No big deal. A nuclear rocket, it would greatly reduce the time to Mars, but that's future work. And as you point out, Bhavya, more difficult. So here we have a concept. I guess this is the plug-and-play idea that you mentioned. You kind of landed on the moon. My understanding, Bhavya, I don't know if you can see it very well from where you sit there, but the idea is you have, first of all, you're not going to have water-cooled nukes in space. These will be sodium-cooled. Sodium reactors have been around since the beginning. How well understood is this technology right now? In other words, could you build one kind of tomorrow and get it ready to go into a fairing and go to the moon?
So that is where it gets interesting, Miles, because what the interim administrators announced is at least a 100 kilowatt reactor. So that changes the size in two significant ways. One is obviously that's a bigger reactor, and it really changes the size of the radiator. So I did the math on it with actually my co-author on the report, Roger Myers. It is equivalent of basically 2 adult African elephants with a fold-out umbrella the size of a basketball court. So
that requires some up mass, as they say in your business, right?
Right. So that's about 15 metric tons, 10 to 15 metric tons. So and right now that we don't really have that kind of lander available. So the interim administrator has really upped the game. He has given NASA and the community a pretty big challenge.
When you look over here, I think what you see is it's in the distance here, but this is the reactor itself. And these are radiators?
But the thing here with these radiators is that heat is not good if you don't have a use for it, but we're going to go to the polar regions of the moon. And the idea is, well, we'll find out how water ice is there. Is it bound on the regolith? Is it however it is there? You may want to heat it up. So you've got another reason to have these there is down the road, you may want to siphon off some of that heat and focus it in certain areas, or part of, again, as your infrastructure gets built up, it's sort of like these cities where they have the steam going all over town and they heat all the buildings. As you build up the infrastructure, you don't want to waste anything you've brought to the moon. And you'll see people taking apart spacecraft to use the parts to make other things. And you may find that these heat systems have a second and third order use. But again, the thought's got to be, I guess it's think big or go home. If you're going to land one of these big honking things on the moon, you're going there with serious permanency in mind and something bigger than 3 or 4 guys sitting in a hab for 3 months. So, they put a dotted line up there, which is kind of interesting. I guess Bhavya she doesn't look unexcited about this. It's just, as they said in that movie, show me the money.
Yeah. Well, so what is the tall pole in the tent, as they like to say in your world, Bhavya, technologically on this? Is it the lift issue, or are there aspects of the design of the reactor itself which need to be worked out?
Yeah, so there is a bunch of tall poles in the land. I already mentioned the radiator has to be very sophisticated. Everything that we build has to survive these swings of temperature from 100 degrees Celsius in sunlight to minus 243 in the shadows. So that's not a trivial amount of work. But I think the challenge is also programmatic and political, as I think you just pointed out. Prometheus burned $400 million without flying. We have, the NASA has to stay focused. In the past,
Sorry.
we lose that focus and we kind of drift away.
I'm sorry
So
for
that is one
laughing,
of the
but
big challenges.
you talk about a perennial problem for NASA, focus, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And there's also other challenges, regulatory challenges, right? So we have a launch approval process, thank goodness, and it's the National Security Presidential Memorandum 20, NSPM 20, but we've actually never tested it. So I'm sure it will be, complicated. Another really interesting thing is the concept of liability and indemnification. On Earth, all Earth nuclear reactors, commercial ones, actually have, the government gives them coverage over a certain amount if something goes wrong. There is no such thing as space indemnification, so we need to figure that one out. And last but not least, there's some kind of international things we need to figure out. For example, what ought to be a safety zone? How far out do we need to keep out so we stay safe and that all of those and still to stay compliant with the Outer Space Treaty. So that's on that front, and then of course we have some infrastructure and workforce issues. We haven't done this before, so we don't have all of the facilities that we need to be able to do the work. We are missing the workforce and the specific kind of fuel we want to use. It's called HALEU, high assay, low enriched uranium. We don't have as much of it as we would like. So again, we need to be manufacturing that. So we need to do 20 things that all need to be sequenced properly and tied together. And as you and Keith both said, there needs to be enough funding for all of that.
Funding and focus.
Funding and focus.
So you mentioned a key point here, I think, the safety zone, the sphere, the no trespassing sign. By UN treaty, nations cannot claim as sovereign territory a chunk of the moon, right? So, but if you have an operating facility there and you don't want people to mess up what you're doing, you can claim these safety zones. How much of this do you think is driven? Because clearly this has been discussed for decades. This is not a new idea at NASA. This is as long as people have been thinking about going into space, it's been discussed. Why the announcement? Why now? What is the geopolitical context on this one?
So I won't speak for the administrator, but there is, if another country, an adversary country, were to be going to the moon and maybe go to a part of the moon that has the easiest to access water ice, for example, some very desirable part of the lunar South Pole, they can, within the bounds of the Outer Space Treaty, in particular under Article 6 and Article 9 of the Outer Space Treaty, they can claim that they are preventing harmful interference by establishing a safety zone. Now, of course, we would apply transparent and proportionate safety standards, voluntary notification, all the things under Artemis Accords. But some other countries, China, Russia, are not bound by those norms, and they could set far larger zones, citing, almost legitimately safety rules. And at the lunar South Pole, where prime terrain and ice deposits are scarce, a large safety zone could lock up critical real estate. And this mirrors China's gray zone tactics on Earth, using plausible safety or environmental justification to gain de facto control. And again, in general, first movers set the precedent. And if China is first, its definition of what safe distances could be the norm. So that's a concern. And again, I don't know if that's what the administrator was thinking about, but that's how I would be thinking about it.
Keith, what are you hearing from all the the people who assiduously read NASA Watch? What are you hearing about what the timing of this and, sort of the political backstory?
Well, again, you're not. I don't think you'll count on one hand the number of people who work there would say it's a bad idea to pursue nuclear resources like this on the moon for exploration. I mean, there's people. Even if you're very green, you're sending your spacecraft to the outer solar system, and you to do science, you need RTG. So this isn't really an issue. This isn't cart before the horse. This is sort of like, here's the cart, there's the horse. How do we marry them up? And it seems to have dropped in the middle of, by the way, how many people are going to be working at NASA when this happens? Will the budget be there so that we can go beyond Artemis 3? In other words, it's like, I said on NASA Watch, all right, so I want to build a boathouse for my speedboat at my vacation mansion on the island. I can't even afford the house, much less to visit it. If we're thinking ahead to Artemis 6, 7, 8, and 9 territory, we don't have the funding for Artemis 4. Have we not planned this out properly? That's sort of what's in people's minds. Like, show me the money, but show me the big picture. Show me the plan. There's no plan. There's just sort of little charts with little icons that move around, and by the time you see them, they're already out of date.
And there's some unstated assumptions there. So, for example, as I said, this reactor is likely to be 10 to 15 metric tons. The only thing that can land something like that is Starship. So there's a clear assumption in here that Starship would be ready to land a nuclear reactor on the moon by 2030, because that deadline is also in the memo, right?
Yeah.
So again, fingers crossed. I'm super enthusiastic, excited, and I mean, if we stick to plans, we would have landed humans on the moon in well before 2030. So it is not implausible, but there's some unwritten assumptions in there.
What we're talking about here seems to be a complete disconnect between rhetoric and reality. Let's go to the moon, let's go to Mars, let's make America great again on these, celestial bodies. And meanwhile, I see the science enterprise cut by half. I see the overall budget cut by a quarter. I see more than 2,000 people pink-slipped and already out the door. How do you reconcile these two things and putting all that into the context of a desire to put nuclear power on any celestial body? Does any of this really add up?
We did this before. Okay, that's the thing. Back in the 60s, we hadn't even put anybody in space for more than a few minutes. And we were still using things that were like V2s, that von Braun had built. And Kennedy came out and made this absurd proclamation in a different context. We were against the Russians and all that. And we're going to do it in 9 years. And as a little boy, I said, oh, okay, we're going to. And we did it. And we did it a bunch of times, and we lost interest, but we did it. And, we want to be able to do this again, but we have other things to worry about now. And we worry more about things than we did back then. So the paradigm and the hope is, can we go back and pick up where we left off? Yes. But here's the thing. While we're not able kind of to do this, why is China wanting to go back? Russia's going to help them, but they're kind of not a player anymore. Why is India so hot? And they're putting their own plans out there now. What have they learned or discovered that we've forgotten? And it's kind of like great nations do these things, which is fine. It's rhetoric, as you said, but they're doing it. They don't see now. They're doing what we did back then. Why aren't we? There's something not involving rocket science or even budgetary or even politics. There's just something about the gumption with which we did it the first time. Where's the mojo? Like Austin Powers, where's the shot to give me back my mojo to want to go do crazy things? Why can't we wire it up? It doesn't seem to be that complicated to say, oh, yeah, you want to do this? How much will it cost? Is it useful? Let's go. We always find a reason to stop. All the great ideas kind of come to a screeching halt for reasons that you just sit there and scratch your head. And it isn't Trump. It isn't Biden. It's just the way we've gotten to do stuff. But our way isn't necessarily the right way because, again, these other countries who have less resources know what is important, and then we're willing to make, it's just called a sacrifice. We don't kind of do that anymore. They are. And they're going to be the ones that are probably going to make some headway where we're just sitting there and watching. And that's kind of unfortunate, let's just say, as an American, that we can't do this.
It's like we threw out our playbook into the dumpster, and China started rooting around and pulled it out and are now taking it to heart. So it's frustrating as it can be, and I think that this is a subject for perhaps another podcast. It's a big one. It's a very big issue you brought up. All right. Thank you both so much, Bhavya and Keith. This was very interesting. I think you shed a lot of light on this subject. There was a lot of misunderstanding, I think, when this first came out. So thanks.
It was so much fun to talk to you. It's an honor, Miles. I'm such a fan. And Keith, we follow you. So please keep doing what you do. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Oh, and one more thought. If there's a meltdown on the moon and it is made of green cheese, isn't that going to be a problem?
Fondue. Moon fondue.
So, in all seriousness, could we really have a meltdown on the moon? Not likely, says Bhavya Lal. These systems are small, well-shielded, and rigorously engineered. There's no water or air to cool them, but also no atmosphere to spread radiation. And in space, where galactic rays and solar storms are constant, a little added radiation source isn't going to tip the scales. In her words, it's like pouring water on yourself in a hurricane. Technically, you're wetter, but it hardly matters. As for how we get there, Bhavya laid out 3 smart options. The first is the Manhattan Project model. Go big, go bold, spend billions, and aim for a full-scale lunar reactor by 2030, as the Trump administration has announced it wants to do. The second is a more pragmatic path, a public-private partnership that builds 2 smaller demos, lets industry lead, and keeps NASA from micromanaging. And the third is a humble one, a small radioisotope power system by 2028 to light the path forward, literally and figuratively. Whichever door we walk through, she says it'll take funding, focus, and a whole lot of coordination. And maybe, just maybe, a little of that old school Hyman Rickover or Leslie Groves mojo. That's it for this episode of Miles to Go. My thanks to Bhavya Lal and Keith Cowing for the deep dive and for the moon fondue. If you're as intrigued by plug-and-play nukes on the moon as I am, check out Bhavya's full report from RAND and the Idaho National Laboratory. You'll find the link in the show notes. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and share Miles to Go. I'm Miles O'Brien. Thanks for listening and watching.